The morning started like any other. The sky was dull gray and a light drizzle covered the city streets. A middle-aged man named Daniel tightened his jacket as he walked toward the parking lot where he worked. It was a quiet job, not glamorous, but it paid the bills. Every day he stood at the small wooden booth, collecting fees, handing out tickets and greeting strangers who barely noticed him. Still, he liked the routine. It gave him a sense of rhythm, something steady in a world that often felt uncertain. Daniel wasn't the type to complain. He lived in a small rented apartment on the edge of the city with his wife and 2 children. His days were long, but he carried himself with quiet pride. He believed that even the simplest job had dignity if done with honesty. Many people rushed past him every day. Some smiled, most didn't. But Daniel kept smiling anyway. He believed kindness cost nothing, and you never knew what someone else might be going through. That morning, he arrived 10 minutes early. He liked those quiet moments before the cars started coming in. He would sip his coffee, watch the traffic lights blink, and think about his family still sleeping at home. The parking lot slowly came to life. First a few office workers, then delivery drivers, and soon a steady flow of cars. Rain tapped lightly on the booth's window as Daniel greeted each driver the same way. "Good morning, sir. That'll be $5. By mid-morning, the drizzle had stopped, but the air remained cool and damp. Daniel leaned against the booth, rubbing his hands together to keep warm. That's when he noticed a black car pulling in, sleek, shiny, and clearly expensive. The kind of car that didn't usually stop in this lot. It moved slowly as if the driver wasn't sure where to park. Daniel straightened up, brushing off his uniform, ready to help. The car stopped in front of him and the tinted window slid down. Inside was a man in his late 50s wearing a tailored suit. He looked calm but distracted, glancing at his watch every few seconds. Daniel stepped forward with his usual smile. "Good morning, sir. Parking's $5, he said, holding out his hand. The man patted his pockets, then checked his wallet. His brow furrowed. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said quickly. "I only have large bills. Do you have change for 100? Daniel shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't, sir. It's been a slow morning. I usually get change later in the day." The man sighed softly. He looked genuinely embarrassed. "I can come back later and pay you," he said. But Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "It's all right," Daniel said with a small laugh. "It's just $5. Don't worry about it." The man looked surprised. "You're sure?" "Of course. It's just a parking fee, not a big deal. You can pay me next time if you come back." The man smiled faintly, still a bit taken aback by Daniel's kindness. "That's very generous of you," he said. "Most people wouldn't bother." Daniel shrugged. "Most people just need a little understanding sometimes. Have a good day, sir." The man nodded slowly, then drove off to find a parking spot. Daniel watched the car for a moment before returning to his booth. To him, it really wasn't anything special. People forgot their wallets or came up short all the time. He'd helped out others before. It just felt natural to be kind. As the hours passed, Daniel went back to his routine, taking payments, tearing tickets, exchanging small talk. But in the back of his mind, he kept thinking about that man. Something about him seemed familiar, though Daniel couldn't place it. He figured maybe he had seen him on TV or in a newspaper. But the thought faded as more cars came through and the day grew busier. At lunchtime, Daniel sat on the edge of the booth and unwrapped a simple sandwich his wife had packed. He ate slowly, watching people rush by with their phones and briefcases. Everyone seemed in such a hurry. He sometimes wondered if any of them ever stopped to look around, to see the faces they passed every day. That was one thing Daniel had learned from this job. People rarely noticed the ones who made their day run smoothly. But he didn't mind. His reward was the few who did smile or thank him or ask how his day was going. Later that afternoon, a young delivery driver stopped by for a chat. He told Daniel how hard it was to make ends meet and how customers often yelled at him. Daniel listened patiently, nodding. "Hang in there," he said. "Hard work always pays off, even when it feels like nobody notices." The driver smiled, thanked him, and drove off. Daniel watched him go, feeling good that his words had made a small difference. The day slowly turned into evening. The sky cleared and a faint golden light filled the lot. Cars came and went, but the black luxury car from the morning didn't return. Daniel figured the man must have gone to an important meeting or maybe to one of those tall office buildings nearby. He didn't think much more about it. After all, he had done what felt right. That was enough for him. When his shift ended, Daniel collected his things and counted the day's earnings. He locked up the booth, then started walking toward the bus stop. His shoes splashed lightly through puddles left by the morning rain. He was tired but content. On the bus ride home, he watched the city lights flicker against the windows and thought about his family waiting for dinner. He felt grateful for the job, the roof over their heads, and the chance to do something honest every day. At home, his wife greeted him with a warm smile and the smell of fresh food. His children ran up to hug him, talking excitedly about their day. Daniel laughed, listening to them as he hung up his jacket. He didn't tell them about the man in the car. To him, it was such a small moment it didn't seem worth mentioning. But that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't help thinking about the stranger's kind smile before driving off. There was something genuine in it, something that made Daniel feel like his simple act had mattered more than he realized. The next morning, Daniel went back to work as usual. The air was clearer, and the sun peeked out from behind the clouds. He took it as a sign of a good day ahead. As he stood at the booth greeting customers, he found himself wondering if that man would come back. Not because he wanted the money, but because he hoped the man had a good day after their brief meeting. Sometimes life had a strange way of connecting people, Daniel thought. Maybe the man had been having a bad day and just needed a reminder that kindness still existed. Maybe his small gesture had lifted someone's mood. He didn't know. All he knew was that it felt good to help without expecting anything in return. He didn't realize it yet. But that small moment, those few words and $5, had quietly set off a chain of events that would soon change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The ordinary man from the parking lot had unknowingly crossed paths with someone whose story would soon intertwine with his own, turning a simple day into something unforgettable. And so, the next chapter of Daniel's life waited quietly, just around the corner, ready to unfold. The next few days went by quietly. The weather warmed up and the parking lot was busier than usual. Daniel kept doing his job with his usual calm smile, never expecting anything special. The small moment with the man in the luxury car had almost slipped from his mind. It had been a simple act, nothing more. People forgot to pay, others lost their change. It happened all the time. He didn't think it would mean anything beyond that day. It was Thursday morning when the black car appeared again. Daniel noticed it right away. The shine, the smooth sound of the engine. It stood out among the regular cars that came in. For a second, Daniel thought he might be imagining it, but then the window rolled down and there he was, the same man from before. This time, he wasn't in a rush. He looked calm and almost cheerful. He parked the car, stepped out, and walked over to Daniel's booth with a small smile. "Good morning," the man said warmly. "You remember me?" Daniel smiled back. "Of course. You're the gentleman who didn't have change the other day." The man laughed softly. "That's right. And I've been meaning to come back. I couldn't stop thinking about how kind you were. You didn't even hesitate to help." Daniel shrugged. "It was nothing, really. Just a parking fee. Maybe to you," the man said, "but not to me." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a white envelope. "I wanted to return your money and thank you properly." Daniel shook his head quickly. "Oh no, please. You don't need to do that. It was just $5. I'm glad to help." But the man gently placed the envelope on the counter of the booth. "Please take it," he said. "It's not just about the money. It's about what it meant." Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to offend the man by refusing again, so he nodded politely and accepted it. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. "You didn't have to go through the trouble." The man smiled and said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed that doing good, even in small ways, can change people's lives. Not many people think that way anymore." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. He was touched by the words, but still didn't understand why his small gesture had made such an impression. The man added, "I'll be back later. I park here often now. Maybe next time we can talk more." He waved goodbye and walked away. Daniel stood there watching him go, the envelope still in his hand. He didn't open it right away. He placed it under the counter and went back to his work. The rest of the morning passed quickly, but his curiosity kept growing. Who was this man? And why did he seem so moved by something so ordinary? When lunch came, Daniel finally sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was not only the $5 he had paid, but also a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly and froze. It was a check. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. He rubbed them and looked again. The number written on it was $10,000. He felt his heart skip a beat. $10,000? That couldn't be right. He checked the name and the signature. It was signed by the same man he had helped. His hands trembled as he looked around, half expecting someone to tell him it was a mistake or a joke. He turned the check over, reading it again. It looked real. His mind raced. Why would a man give him such a huge amount for something so small? He thought about returning it. Maybe it had been written by mistake. But deep down he remembered the man's calm words, that this wasn't about the money but what it meant. Still, Daniel wasn't comfortable keeping it. He spent the rest of the day distracted, his thoughts going in circles. By evening he had decided he would give it back. It just didn't feel right. He didn't earn that kind of money, and he didn't want to take something that wasn't meant for him. The next morning, Daniel arrived early again, hoping to see the man. He rehearsed what he'd say, how he appreciated the gesture but couldn't accept it. Hours passed, and he didn't show up. The sun climbed higher, and Daniel's hope faded. Maybe the man wouldn't come back. Maybe it really was a gift, and he was overthinking it. Still, he kept the check safely tucked away in his bag. Around noon, the familiar car pulled in. Daniel straightened immediately. The man stepped out and walked over with the same calm smile. "I see you got my envelope," he said. "Yes, sir," Daniel said quickly. "And I have to tell you I can't accept this. It's too much. You already repaid the fee. This is too generous." The man chuckled softly. "I thought you might say that," he said. "But I want you to keep it. You didn't help me for a reward. That's exactly why I want you to have it." Daniel shook his head again. "Sir, I really appreciate your kindness, but this is more than I can accept." The man looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Do you have children, Daniel?" Daniel blinked, surprised that he remembered his name. "Yes, two, a boy and a girl," the man smiled. "Then you know how hard it is to build a future for them. Sometimes life gives us help when we least expect it. Think of this as that kind of help, not a reward, but a chance." Daniel fell silent. He could feel the sincerity in the man's voice. There was no pride, no show, just honesty. Still, it felt surreal. He hesitated again. "You're sure about this?" he asked finally. "I'm very sure," the man replied. "And one more thing. Promise me you'll use it wisely. Don't waste it. Let it make life a little easier for you and your family." Daniel nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you enough." The man smiled and reached out to shake his hand. "You already did," he said. "The day you helped me without thinking twice." With that, he turned and walked back to his car. Daniel stood there, watching him drive away, the check still in his hand. For a long time, he didn't move. The noise of the city faded into the background. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, part disbelief, part gratitude, and part wonder. When he finally went home that evening, he told his wife what had happened. She was just as shocked. They sat together, staring at the check on the table. It felt unreal. "Why you?" she asked softly. "Out of all the people he could have met?" Daniel didn't have an answer. "Maybe because I didn't expect anything," he said. Maybe he just needed to see that not everyone wants something in return. His wife smiled and took his hand. Then maybe that's why life decided to give something back. For days afterward, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. He kept the check safe but didn't rush to cash it. He wanted to be sure he was doing the right thing. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized the man had meant every word. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message behind it. Kindness still mattered. Goodness still had value. He didn't tell anyone at work about it. He didn't want attention or gossip. He kept showing up every day, smiling at every customer, doing his job as always. But inside, something had changed. The small act he had forgotten so easily had come back to him in a way that would stay forever in his memory. What Daniel didn't know was that the man wasn't done with him yet. The check was only the beginning. The stranger had plans. Plans that would soon bring Daniel into a world he never dreamed of, and teach him just how far one small act of kindness could reach. The days that followed were unlike any Daniel had ever lived. He went to work as usual, standing at his little booth, but something inside him had changed. The check rested safely in a drawer at home, and every morning before leaving for work he looked at it, still wondering if it was all real. $10,000. He had never held so much money in his life. He could pay off debts, fix things in the house, maybe even save for his children's education. Yet he hadn't spent a single penny. Something inside him said to wait. Each time the black car appeared, Daniel felt his heart lift a little. The man always waved or stopped by to say hello. Their small talks became part of Daniel's day. They spoke about simple things: work, weather, family. The man never acted like someone important, and Daniel liked that. He treated everyone the same, with warmth and respect. One afternoon, about a week later, Daniel saw the same car pull in, but this time the man looked like he had come with purpose. He parked, stepped out, and walked over to the booth carrying a small paper bag. "I brought you some lunch," he said with a smile. "You mentioned last time you don't get much of a break." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to, sir," he said. "I wanted to," the man replied simply. "Besides, I owed you more than a meal." Daniel accepted it gratefully, and they shared the food together, leaning against the booth as the city hummed around them. The man asked about Daniel's family, his work, and his dreams. Daniel was a bit shy at first, but the man had a way of listening that made you feel comfortable. "I've been here for years," Daniel said. "I started when my kids were small. I wanted something stable. It's not much, but it's honest work." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Honest work is rare these days," he said. "And people like you remind others that decency still exists." Daniel smiled faintly. "I just do my job, sir." "That's what makes you different," the man said softly. "You do it with heart." They stood quietly for a moment, watching cars go by. Daniel didn't know much about the man, but he could tell he was someone used to big decisions and busy schedules. Yet here he was, eating lunch beside a parking attendant like an old friend. That more than the check impressed Daniel. When the man finally left that day, he turned back and said, "Daniel, I'd like to see you again soon. There's something I've been thinking about." Daniel nodded, curious, but didn't ask questions. He had learned that this man liked to reveal things in his own time. 2 days later, the black car appeared once more. This time the man wasn't alone. A younger assistant sat in the passenger seat, typing on a laptop. The man stepped out and walked straight to Daniel. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked. "Of course," Daniel said, wiping his hands on his jacket. "I want to tell you who I am," the man said, looking him in the eye. "Not because it matters, but because you deserve to know." He paused before continuing. "My name is Richard. I own a group of companies here in the city. I've built my life around business, but lately, I've been thinking about something else, about people, about community." Daniel stared quietly, trying to process the words. You're a businessman?" he asked. Richard smiled slightly. "Something like that. Some would call me wealthy, but that doesn't mean much. What matters to me now is what I can do with it." Daniel nodded slowly. "I see," he said. Though truthfully, he didn't fully understand why someone like Richard would spend his time talking to him. Richard went on. "The day you paid that small parking fee for me, I had just come from a meeting where everything felt wrong. People argued about profits, numbers, deals, but not one person talked about people. Then you, a man who had no reason to help me, did it without hesitation. You didn't ask who I was, you didn't care about the car I drove. You just helped. That small thing, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten." Daniel felt a warmth in his chest. "I didn't do anything special, sir." "You did more than you know," Richard replied. "And I want to do something in return, not to repay you, but to continue what you started." He handed Daniel a small folder. Inside were papers, official-looking, with printed logos and signatures. "I'm starting a new foundation," Richard said. "A program that helps people in need, families, small workers, those trying to rebuild their lives. I need people I can trust, people with heart, not just experience. I'd like you to join." Daniel blinked, completely caught off guard. "Me? But I'm not trained for that. I've never worked in an office or anything like that." Richard smiled kindly. "You don't need a degree to understand people. You already have what most can't learn, kindness. I can teach you the rest." For a moment, Daniel didn't know what to say. His heart pounded in his chest. "Sir, I don't know if I can do this. I'm just an attendant. I don't belong in that world." Richard shook his head gently. "You belong anywhere goodness is needed. Trust me, Daniel. You'll do well." Daniel looked at the folder again. It felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. It was a chance, something he had never been offered before. He thought about his family, his children, the endless days of routine. Maybe it was time to take a step forward. "I'll try," Daniel said quietly. "If you really think I can," Richard smiled. "I know you can." They shook hands, and that handshake marked the start of something Daniel couldn't yet imagine. For the rest of the day, Daniel worked in a quiet daze. Cars came and went, people hurried by, but his mind was somewhere else. A foundation, a real job helping people. It felt like a dream. That evening, he told his wife everything. At first, she was shocked, then her eyes filled with tears. "Do you realize what this means?" she said softly. "After all these years of hard work, something good is finally happening." Daniel smiled. "I just don't want to mess it up." "You won't," she said. "You've spent your whole life helping people without even noticing. Now you'll just be doing it in a new way." The following week, Richard invited Daniel to his office for the first time. The building was tall, glass reflecting the whole city. Daniel felt out of place in his plain clothes, but when he walked in, everyone treated him with respect. Richard introduced him to the team as the man who reminded me what kindness looks like. Those words stayed with Daniel. Over the next few days, Richard showed him how the foundation worked. They planned projects, donations to schools, food drives, support for workers who lost their jobs. Daniel's role was to talk to people, listen to their stories, understand their needs. He realized that all his years of working at the parking lot had taught him something priceless: how to read people, how to make them feel seen. One afternoon, as they sat in the office discussing ideas, Richard looked at him and said, "You see, Daniel, money builds walls, but kindness builds bridges." "You taught me that," Daniel smiled. "And you showed me that bridges can reach farther than I ever thought." Life had turned in a way Daniel never expected. From a small act at a parking booth to working beside a man whose name people whispered with respect. It all felt unreal, but deep down Daniel stayed the same. He still greeted strangers with a smile, still helped without hesitation, and still believed that goodness, no matter how small, had the power to change everything. What he didn't know yet was that the biggest change was still to come. The story that had begun with $5 and a simple act of kindness was far from over. The following months changed Daniel's life in quiet but powerful ways. Each morning still began with coffee and the sound of his alarm, but now, instead of walking to the small parking booth, he took the bus to a bright new office downtown. He still wore simple clothes, still greeted people with warmth, but now he had a purpose that stretched far beyond collecting parking fees. He was working at the foundation Richard had started, an organization meant to help families struggling to get by, students trying to stay in school, and small workers like him who just needed a fair chance. The first few weeks were hard. Daniel wasn't used to office life. The computers, meetings, and fast-talking staff made him nervous. He often stayed late just to understand how things worked, but Richard was patient. He'd often stop by Daniel's small desk and ask, "How are you holding up?" Daniel would smile and say, "Still learning, sir." And Richard would laugh softly and reply, "That's the best thing a man can say." Daniel soon found his place. His job was simple but meaningful. He visited neighborhoods, talked to people, and listened to their stories. He helped the foundation understand where help was truly needed. He spoke with families who couldn't afford food, young men looking for work, and elderly people living alone. Each story reminded him of his own struggles, and he worked harder to make sure they were heard. One afternoon, Daniel visited a small neighborhood on the edge of the city. The houses were worn down, paint peeling from the walls, but the people were kind. A woman there told him about her son who had dropped out of school because she couldn't afford his books. Daniel listened quietly, then promised to do something. When he returned to the office and shared her story, Richard nodded. "We'll help her," he said, and they did. The boy got new books and a scholarship to return to school. A week later, the woman sent Daniel a thank you note written in careful handwriting. "You gave us hope." Daniel read it 3 times and kept it in his desk drawer. That small victory gave him strength. He started to see how small acts could ripple outward, just like the one that had changed his own life. Each week, the foundation reached more people, donating food, funding medical help, building small shelters. Daniel didn't just feel like an employee. He felt like part of something good. Richard watched him closely. Sometimes he'd call Daniel into his office to talk. "You know," he said one day, I've worked with hundreds of people, but few have your heart. You remind me why I started this in the first place. Daniel smiled modestly. I just do what feels right. That's why you're the right man for this, Richard said. This world doesn't need more clever people. It needs more honest ones. Their friendship grew quietly, built on respect and trust. Despite his wealth, Richard never made Daniel feel small. He listened to his ideas, often saying, "That's a good point," or "Let's try that." Daniel began suggesting programs, small loans for vendors, food banks, and community centers. Slowly, the foundation started to reflect his ideas too. One evening, after a long day, Daniel and Richard stood by the window of the office watching the city lights. "Do you ever think about that day?" Richard asked. "The parking lot?" Daniel said, smiling. "Every day. I still can't believe everything that came from something so small." Richard nodded. "It reminds me that sometimes the best things in life happen by accident. But maybe they aren't accidents at all." Daniel thought about that long after he went home. He realized how much his life had shifted, not just his job or income, but his view of the world. He had seen both sides now, the struggle and the success, and it made him more grateful than ever. At home, things had changed too. His wife had started volunteering at the foundation, helping organize food drives. His children were proud of him. "Dad helps people now," his son told his teacher one day, and that simple sentence filled Daniel's heart with quiet pride. They didn't live in luxury, but they had comfort, peace, and joy, the kind that comes from purpose. One Friday afternoon, Daniel received an envelope on his desk. It was from Richard. Inside was a letter that read, "Come with me tomorrow. There's something I want you to see." It included an address, no explanation. Daniel showed up the next morning and found Richard waiting near a construction site. The air smelled of dust and fresh cement. Workers were setting up steel beams and a large sign stood nearby. "Future site of the Community Care Center." Daniel looked around in amazement. "Is this one of the foundation's projects?" "Yes," Richard said with a smile. "But it's not just any project. This center is your idea. You mentioned it months ago, remember? A place where people can find help, job training, and guidance all in one building. We're making it real." Daniel's eyes widened. "My idea?" "Yours," Richard confirmed. "And I wanted you to see it first." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. He felt overwhelmed. To see something he'd only spoken about standing before him, it was more than he could have dreamed of. He turned to Richard, his voice low. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Richard said softly, "by showing me what truly matters." As they stood there watching the workers, Daniel realized that this building would outlast both of them. It would help countless people. People who might never know his name, just as he hadn't known the man in the car that day. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that kindness had continued to grow. Weeks passed and the project moved quickly. Daniel visited the site often, helping wherever he could, talking to workers, listening to suggestions, ensuring the place would be warm and welcoming. He wanted it to feel human, not just functional. He insisted on adding a small garden in front, saying, "People need a place to sit and breathe before they go inside." One afternoon, as the center neared completion, Richard joined him again. "You know," he said, "when I met you, I was tired of people. Everyone wanted something from me, but you reminded me that there are still good men in the world." Daniel looked at him with gratitude. "And you reminded me that good men can be found anywhere, even behind the wheel of a car." They laughed quietly. The friendship between them had become more than chance. It was built on something real, something neither had expected. It wasn't about money or success. It was about shared purpose. When the Community Care Center finally opened, Daniel stood by the entrance watching people walk in, families, students, workers, all with hope in their eyes. Reporters came, cameras flashed, but Daniel stayed in the background. This wasn't about him. It was about what kindness had created. Richard found him standing quietly by the door and said, "You should be up there speaking." Daniel shook his head. "You're the one who built it," Richard smiled. "You're the reason it exists." That day ended with applause and laughter, but for Daniel, the real joy came when a little girl ran up to him, handed him a flower, and said, "Thank you for this place." He bent down, smiled, and said, "It wasn't just me, sweetheart. It was everyone who believes in helping others." As he looked around the new center, the walls bright, the rooms filled with life. Daniel thought back to the rainy morning when he'd handed over $5 to a stranger. It had seemed so small then, but now he understood. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, carries the power to grow into something far bigger than we can imagine. What he didn't know was that his story wasn't over yet. There was still one more surprise waiting, one final moment that would bring everything full circle. The morning of the grand opening felt different. The sky was clear, the air smelled fresh, and a soft breeze carried the sound of laughter from people gathering outside the new community care center. Daniel stood near the gate wearing a plain shirt and a calm smile. He wasn't the type who liked attention, but that day he couldn't hide his pride. What had once been just an idea was now standing tall before him, a place built on hope, kindness, and second chances. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was simple. There were speeches, cameras, and smiles all around. People clapped as the doors opened and families began walking in. Daniel moved quietly through the crowd, helping elders find seats and greeting children with gentle words. To him, this wasn't just a project. It was a dream come true. As the event went on, Richard came up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done well," he said warmly. "This place will help more people than you can imagine." Daniel looked at him and smiled. "We did it together." Richard nodded. "Maybe, but it started with you." After the ceremony, Daniel spent hours walking through the center. He visited each room, the food pantry, the classroom for skill training, the counseling area, and the small garden out front. Everywhere he looked, he saw people smiling. Volunteers were already helping families register for programs. A group of young men sat at computers learning basic skills. It was everything he'd hoped it would be. As he stepped into the garden, he noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench, looking at the flowers. Daniel walked over and asked softly, "Are you all right, sir?" The man nodded. "Yes, I'm just taking it in. I never thought I'd see something like this in our neighborhood." Daniel sat beside him. "It's here for you," he said. "For all of us." The man looked at him with kind eyes. "You must be the one who helped build it." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then said, "Just one of many. We all played a part." The man smiled faintly. "Still, you should be proud. You don't see people do things like this just for others anymore." That small conversation stayed with Daniel long after the man left. It reminded him of how far he'd come, from a small parking booth to being part of something that truly mattered. A few days later, when most of the excitement had settled, Richard invited Daniel to his office. He looked thoughtful as Daniel entered. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," he said. Daniel sat down, wondering what it could be. Richard leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "I'm getting older, Daniel. And while I still have energy, I know I won't be around forever. I need someone I trust to keep this foundation alive, to protect what we've built." Daniel looked surprised. "Sir, are you—" "I'm not stepping down yet," Richard interrupted with a gentle laugh. "But I want to plan for the future, and I can't think of anyone better to lead this than you." Daniel was stunned. "Me? I don't have the experience. I never went to university. You're the heart of this place," Richard said firmly. "You understand people. You know what it means to struggle and to care. That's what matters most." Daniel didn't know what to say. The offer felt too big, too unreal. But when he looked into Richard's eyes, he saw sincerity. He wasn't just being kind. He meant it. "I'll do my best," Daniel said finally. "I know you will," Richard replied with a smile. Over the next months, Richard began teaching Daniel everything he knew about managing the foundation, the meetings, the finances, the partnerships. Daniel learned slowly but steadily. He asked questions, took notes, and spent late nights studying. The more he learned, the more confident he became. Outside of work, life was peaceful. His family had grown closer, his children were thriving in school, and his wife often told him how proud she was. They no longer worried about bills or rent. But Daniel never forgot where he came from. Every weekend, he still visited the small parking booth where he used to work. It was now operated by a young man named Toby, who reminded Daniel of himself years ago, hardworking, humble, and polite. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by to say hello. Toby looked surprised to see him. "Sir, what brings you here?" Daniel smiled. "Just checking in. You're doing a good job." They talked for a while. Before leaving, Daniel slipped a folded note into Toby's hand. "Keep this safe," he said. "It's just a small help for tough days." When Toby opened it later, he found a few bills and a note that read, "Someone once helped me when I least expected it. Now it's your turn someday." Daniel walked away smiling. It felt like a circle had closed, kindness passing from one person to another just like before. As the years passed, the community care center became a beacon in the city. Thousands of families received help, students got scholarships, and people found new hope. Whenever someone asked how it all started, Daniel would tell them a simple story about a rainy morning, a broken machine, and a stranger who changed everything with one kind gesture. One day, years later, the news broke that Richard had peacefully passed away in his sleep. The whole city mourned him. The foundation held a memorial, attended by hundreds of people, workers, families, and even children who had been helped by the center. Daniel stood at the front, tears in his eyes but gratitude in his heart. When it was his turn to speak, he walked to the stage slowly. Richard wasn't just a successful man, he began. He was someone who believed in people. He saw good where others didn't. And I'm standing here because he once believed in me. He paused for a moment, his voice trembling slightly. The best way to honor him isn't with words but with actions. Let's keep helping others. Let's keep spreading kindness. That's what he'd want. The crowd applauded softly, and Daniel looked up, feeling a quiet sense of peace. He knew Richard's spirit would live on in every act of kindness, every smile, every person who walked through the center's doors. After the ceremony, Daniel walked alone through the garden outside. The flowers were in full bloom, bright and alive. He stopped near the bench where he'd once sat with the old man years ago. On the back of the bench there was now a small plaque that read, "In memory of a friendship that changed lives." Daniel ran his fingers over the engraved words and whispered, "Thank you, my friend." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Daniel sat there for a while thinking about the journey, the struggles, the hope, and the miracle that had begun with $5 and a simple act of kindness. As he rose to leave, he noticed a young woman walking toward the center with two small children. She looked tired but hopeful. He smiled at her and held the door open. She thanked him softly, and for a moment he saw himself in her, a reminder of how one good deed can change a life forever. That evening, Daniel walked home with a calm heart. The streets glowed with soft light, and the city felt alive around him. He no longer thought of himself as lucky. He thought of himself as blessed, because he knew now that kindness has a way of finding its way back, sometimes when you least expect it. And so, the story that began in a quiet parking lot ended not with wealth or fame, but with something far greater: the legacy of compassion, the power of faith, and the truth that even the smallest act of goodness can light up a life for generations to come.